Janet, thanks very much for talking with me this afternoon. It's great.
Of
Um,
course, I'm delighted.
we're so happy that Norcha and I, that you contributed to our book with your fantastic project. I have the photograph, an image of your book, Shaping Science, behind me
Yes, I saw
here.
that.
Congratulations. It's a fantastic
Thank
book.
you. Thank you so
So
much.
we're wondering what you've been thinking about the sociology of testing since you wrote the piece for the British Journal of Sociology. There's lots of interesting stuff in there about the NASA space missions. But I know you've been thinking about the sociology of testing for a while. So what's interesting for you now?
Um, I'm still really interested in testing as a test of institutions and institutional stability and the kinds of qualities of the organizations and institutions that are producing these tests. And I've been thinking a lot about that in the wake of the study that I did, but also as we're going through the COVID-19 era. So the key point of the paper that I wrote was to show that, you know, in this mission where these scientists are going to go explore this moon that they've only seen very briefly. So they have some ideas of what's there, but they don't totally know. And the object, the moon itself, is very slippery, and they even call it uncooperative. And it becomes more cooperative the more institutionally robust they become. So as the mission goes from just kind of like pie in the sky to we have funding, we have PIs, we have a structure and an infrastructure, the instruments are getting built, the object itself stabilizes kind of at the same pace as the institution stabilizes. And that was really clear to me because there was another mission that was planning to go to the same moon around the same time, sort of loosely affiliated. And they never got enough money or institutional support to really get off the ground. And as a result, the way they saw the moon was still as uncooperative. They were like, well, it depends if we get there, if the moon cooperates. Otherwise, we don't know if we're going to be able to answer these questions, these tests.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the key thing of the paper. And now that I've been watching the COVID-19 tests get developed and rolled out, and the national responses and the sort of the different responses in different countries around the world to the crisis. I've been watching how that kind of stability about what COVID-19 is also shifting, and its cooperativeness is shifting under these different testing regimens as different institutions of testing become more concrete. So yeah,
I'm trying to see. I was wondering, in the COVID-19 comparison, which is the equivalent of the moon? And so it's not me who went actually this morning to get a test here in Bologna, so I can get on a plane next week. But it is the virus
the virus, yeah,
the virus. So tell me about that. That's interesting. The virus becomes less cooperative as a tested subject, the less institutionalized the regime of testing. That's it. How would that work?
Well, I would hypothesize that's the case. I haven't studied the COVID case in enough detail, but I think it's intriguing. So I'm just thinking back to when we didn't really know very much about COVID. There wasn't a test available. And then the kind of rollout of testing, standard tests that started to get quick approval in various different countries to be used. So I'm looking at the United States as an example. It's where I currently live, but I'm not from here. So I come from a country that has a much more centralized federal, like provincial response in health delivery, right? So where my family is, there is a provincial health clinic where there is a test available and everybody knows where you go to get the test, right? But where I live now, there's an urgent care clinic up the street that offers one test. There's our school district offers another test that they sometimes do, that they contract with another urgent care clinic to do. There's the pharmacies that you can drive through to get tests. There's just like a million different options. There's even an option where you can call a doctor and they send you a test at home and you send that to some lab somewhere and then you get some answers. And then there's what, say, Princeton University has done, where they spun up their own local testing lab for all the students that are living on campus and all employees that are essential and required to be there, and they test twice a week. Okay, so what's interesting for me about this is that whether or not you have COVID should be just dependent on the test. But because you can go to so many different places, you could just go get whatever answer you kind of want at any of these places. So if you get a positive result somewhere, but you're not really sure about that, you can go somewhere else and maybe get a negative result, right? Which puts the test in question. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean if you really have COVID, it should come up positive both times, but there's this kind of sense that COVID might not be cooperating, or like maybe you just didn't get a good enough sample that time, right? But looking somewhere like Princeton, where they've had this institutional structure, a very strong institution that then is like doing their own testing, it's become routinized, it's become part of a regime. You go in, you spit in a cup twice a week, and they tell you if you have COVID or not, and you don't contest that because it's now become part of this trusted institutional domain. Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting for how we think about, surely whether or not you have COVID should be kind of a binary, like either or, right? Either you have the virus in your system or you don't. But because of the way these tests are distributed institutionally, and they have that little tiny margin for error, right? The margin for error is like written on, like from the institution is also written onto the object, right? That it could just be slippery, right? So I've been thinking a bit about that.
Yeah, let's talk about this a little bit more. Like the case is interesting. It made me think about two things. First of all, your case that I wondered, was it the virus that was less and now more cooperative, or the particular case you said, is it that something about, I don't know, the faculty and students at Princeton University, Columbia is no different either, have been, I don't know, domesticated, they are less wild, they are more cooperative. Okay.
Yeah. I don't actually think the ontological status of COVID changes. It's the institutional status that's different. And the more stable the institution is, the more the students and the faculty know how to behave, the more domesticated they become, right? The more the results are trusted and it feels like it's a true thing. And that's the case with Europa. Europa isn't changing the moon. Like it's not, as far as we know, it's not like dramatically showing a different face to different scientists when they look at it. Right. But it's that when things are uncertain for the scientists, they say, oh, Europa's uncooperative. And I think similarly, when we have these like uncertain institutional contexts, something that looks like a very simple yes, no, positive, negative test is going to look uncooperative too. Oh, but it's slippery. It could be a new variant. It could be that false positive, or that, that elusive false positive or false negative, right? That uncertainty that's actually an institutional uncertainty is written onto the object. The object's just doing its thing.
Yeah. I still got two things, because I got the first one that I just didn't ask. I still have another one, because
go for it.
So one way, because I said, so what is it that's being stabilized in a certain way? The institution is settled, and then it's the virus that's settled, or it's it's cooperative, or it's the people. And I think one of the possibilities is that the virus as an actor really is never separated from the people, because it must act through people. And so to talk about domesticating the virus absent what is happening with people would kind of miss the point. So that's it. There was one.
Let me follow that up, because there is an actor network theory way of approaching it. So like I'm black boxing the virus, right? Yeah. Which is the thing that Bruno Latour says you're not supposed to do. I assume that the virus is just doing its thing. And what's more interesting for me is when people talk about the virus as uncooperative. Certainly in the Latourian view of the world, all these objects are always uncooperative and slippery, and these fragile alliances are always, threatening to break apart. And there is a way to look at it, which is to say that, COVID has to be enticed to cooperate. You've got to get that specimen to interact with your PCR device or whatever, and and the right information has to be inputted in a computer, and that has to be texted to your cell phone and stuff like that. All of those little actants have to align, including COVID, right? COVID has to be taught to be domesticated in such a way that we can test for it and we can say that we have detected it or not. So I think all of that is likely true. You could look at it that way. I'm not an actor network theorist myself, but that is totally a way to look at it. I think what's interesting for me is the sense of stability versus instability of those institutional networks.
Yeah.
Right. And this is in alignment with the actor network idea, right? That the more stable the network is, the more that object is just going to keep participating. But especially in a place like, looking at that NASA case where there were these two missions that were in an early stage that were ongoing, looking at the same object, where in one case, the language about that object stabilized because more money went in and funding lines came in, and we knew who the scientists were, and the instrumentation was there. And then the moon was just like the moon, right? We're there to figure some stuff out about it. We don't know everything about it, but it just was fine. And in the other case, the moon was still uncooperative. And I think we're seeing this also in a very flexible testing regime like the United States around COVID-19, that, at one point the president was like, well, we're just finding more of it because we're testing more, right? I mean, there's so many different narratives about what these tests are and what they mean, depending on where you are and which context you're in.
Yeah. Anyway. So you answered my second one, but you did it exactly because when we were talking about the virus in that context of stability, I immediately started thinking about the pasteurization of France, Bruno's book, and the microbe and its domestication, its unruliness. Janet, we can stop. It's we can keep going.
Have we solved all the problems?
But I think it's really good.